you don't know me, I'm Kelly Eckhoff, the mayor, and I'm really excited that we have a full room of people here tonight for this presentation that we have actually been working on getting to fruition for about 18 months. I'm excited that Paul Scharnett here, who is our presenter with Hewn Studio, the city has been working with Paul really through the whole process of trying to improve our housing opportunities, and he has been consulting with us, and my council person and I believe Jim and a few others from the city, I don't know if we attended a session that Paul did in Bloomington Normal a couple of years ago, probably. He is really, I'm going to call him an expert in upstairs downtown. And so I hope everything he provides tonight is beneficial to you who are building owners, you who might be interested in pursuing a building and doing something upstairs, and some of you who may be construction workers that might have. We really are hoping that we can gain housing in our downtown area. It is an area that can be its own community where people can live and get to work, get to the bank, get to church, get to the grocery store, get to retail shops without having to get in their car. And that can be very beneficial to many individuals. And it also just provides a vibrant area for our community. So with further ado, I will turn it over to Paul and all of his good stuff that he's going to share with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Very kind words. I don't know that I'm an expert in anything, but I'll at least play one on TV. So a couple of the words about who I am. I'm the principal and director of operations at Hewn Studio. We transitioned. Before that, I owned my own firm for about 5 years. And then before that, worked for Russell Francois, who had done quite a bit of work here in central Illinois. I'm licensed in Illinois, was also formerly licensed in Colorado. I've practiced in Tennessee, Indiana, Missouri, and Illinois as well. And I am currently the vice chair, formerly the vice chair of the City of Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission. Also sit on the Town of Normal Building Board of Appeals. Building Board of Appeals, if you don't know what that is, that's just where we start to come up with the codes and try to make those applicable, or we adopt codes and talk through some of those things. Or if you really don't like what the building official says, eventually it'll come to us and we have to figure out a solution. So far, have yet to have anybody disagree with the code official that much, but occasionally, I'm sure there's an opportunity out there. I've got about 15 years of experience in central Illinois, and more than 80% of my work has been on existing buildings, whether that is a very small back porch stair for someone, or whether that's redoing the entire Pantograph building that's out for bid right now. It's a $21.7 million project in Bloomington. It's an adaptive reuse. It's a fantastic, very interesting sort of thing, but it's not the typical. Most of the typical that we see is about 20 feet wide, about 80 feet deep. And that's your downtown project. But right now, you probably also know me as the guy who's responsible for your scaffolding all over the courthouse. A necessary evil, unfortunately. That project will continue to go through next year, at least for a portion of next year. But it is moving along well, and I can tell you that is very necessary and has been for quite some time. But grateful to see it's all moving. But before I continue, I'd love to see a show of hands tonight. Who are building owners? Okay, and are you building owners in downtown Bloomington, or just downtown Pontiac, or are you building owners outside of the downtown? Downtown. Oh, sorry. What about those who are leasing from somebody else? Maybe you're a business owner, but you're building somebody else's building. Ooh, interesting. A lot of owner-occupied structure. That's great. That's really rare. We don't often see that, especially in smaller communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think we have. I'm going to be completely off base, probably, on some of these things because it's an outsider's perspective. But what I can tell you is that I'm trying to make some sort of assertions, trying to understand what makes Pontiac unique and special. I think that if we were to leverage community assets and really say something about what Pontiac is, it's about getting lost in a place and time. You know, there's a lot about cars. There's a lot about Route 66, the murals, the museums, the courthouse, the park. It's a lot about driving. It's a lot about beautiful images and seeing Route 66 plastered all over everything. But I see this, and I see all the people gathered together. And I notice that there's a lot of conversation about a lot of things happening in the community and about expectation and about something that's really fun and inviting. I've been to a lot of historic downtowns. Anybody ever been to Glen Ellen? Naperville, Aurora, Rockford? Very different style for a lot of things. It's not so Route 66 centric, but still has a unique quality and a vibe to it. And I think as I look at Pontiac, I feel like it really does become its own escape. It's got a little bit of separation. The downtown has a little bit of separation off of the highway. It has enough association that's fascinating to me. It's also a lot of tourism, a lot of attractions. I think there's every reason to want to visit downtown Pontiac for all the reasons that we said before. But what about, or I should say, I think it's a destination downtown from the car shows, from everything else. You all know about that a lot more than I do about what makes it interesting for you. But from a tourist perspective, what's going to pull me off of the highway? What's going to make me want to stay downtown is always the question. And it's really the built environment, right? You've got something here that is beautiful and it is unique. A lot of these buildings have been taken care of. Some of them haven't. Some of them have been dealt quite a hand of neglect, but you got to admit, that's pretty spectacular. And there are not a lot of places on earth that still have the cohesiveness and the integrity that downtown Pontiac has. And it's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's something that I think we could all get behind. But it comes with complications, right? You have a limited amount of these properties that are available. A limited amount of properties that have been passed on or connected with, or as you are building owners, you may be occupying them. There's not a developer from somewhere that has snatched up 80 properties somewhere, right? No? That's a great thing. That means that there's control over some of those things on an individual basis. But that also means that a lot of properties that we see in other communities are not quite leveraged for second floors. Sometimes we see that first floors get filled out. I'd be curious from the property owners, how many of you are seeing your second floors filled right now? Show of hands. Much smaller than those that are on the first floor. It's good to know. I think there are some limits, right? There are some things that are problematic in the way that they're set up right now, whether that be a building code, whether that's the water, the sewer, the electric, whatever the infrastructure needs are for downtown. And these are significant limitations. And of course, if it's been vacant for a while, time remains undefeated, right? It's gonna do its thing, and I've been fortunate to work on a few of these properties in downtown Pontiac and seen for myself firsthand the problems that are there. Total Eclipse, worked on the upstairs portion of that building, worked on the above DeLongs, currently working on Acres End. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the challenges are common for these areas. There was an existing building code at one point. They met that. They don't anymore. How do we try to leverage those and make those occupiable spaces? But also, how do we look at this from the perspective of, this is a great community, who wants to live downtown? And what are the demographics of people who are going to live downtown? Anybody tell me what the average median age, the median age for Pontiac is? 43. 43. 46? Anybody else? 43 is the right answer. So it was good, yeah. But anyway, I did look it up. Median income. 55. It's close. 55. This is based on the 23 census data. I may be wrong, but that's an interesting tell. Who wants to live downtown is usually somebody that hasn't quite established a family or somebody that has already had people move out. So right in that 43 age, you might be having kids, you might not have kids yet, or there's something on the horizon there. What is going to attract somebody to downtown becomes a real question. But I think the real question underneath all of that is about creating a critical mass and about creating a lovable critical mass. So when I say critical mass, I'm looking for something that is a compounding level of activities, amenities, people in a specific place and time that make it feel like something more than it is. So in Bloomington, we have a problem. We have beautiful chunks of downtown, but we have very few that are connected. And so you can go along one block and have great conversations. You can eat, you can have all of these interested people. But on my block, only half of the street works. I'm right next to Epiphany Farms, and then there's Diggers next to us, Cash Bar, if anybody's ever really interested. Fascinating conversation. And then on the other side, we also have another bar. And so this little neck of the woods is totally filled out, but across the street is Pars Rugs and an antique shop. The problem is that Pars Rugs has seldom seen a client. The antique shop is between 3 hours of the day that we see people going in. And so building that critical mass on our block doesn't work. We have a professional service. Hi, I'm the architect. I'm filling up a storefront that could be something a little bit better to create some interest in that front door. Now, having said that, the second floors that are above are only filled on a portion of our block. Anywhere else in Bloomington, people are interested in going because it's cheaper. Why live downtown where you have no yard, where you have maybe higher rent or utilities that you have to deal with, when I could live somewhere else? Well, what if I don't have an option? Bloomington Normal is short something like 4,600 homes. And we're just seeing a lot of horse trading that's happening right now. And a couple of years ago, it was short 10,000 homes. Now demands have changed and people have moved elsewhere and things are moving along. But what I see is that somebody needs to do something with these second floor spaces. And it has to happen at the right time. And there has to be enough interest and enough people willing to want to live in those kinds of spaces. So that's where lovable places come into play. So Vitruvius, who is the great-great-grandfather of architecture, his Latin phrase was firmitas, utilitas, et venustas, which is firmity, commodity, and delight. Now, they taught us that in architecture school, and I think it's really fascinating, but it's absolutely useless in most conversations because it also doesn't talk about money. So I'll get to that in a moment, but the places in which we find delight are the same places that we're willing to invest in. And I've been preaching that argument for a long, long time. I've given plenty of talks even on just that. And I can tell you that my business partner and I were talking about that exact thing right before I came here today. And because it is often a labor of love that we have in these existing buildings, there has to be something that we can do to invest in them. But a lot of these old buildings, especially what I like to call ordinary construction, where it's a masonry wall, wood frame connecting everything in the middle, what we see in downtowns the most, they are very flexible and they can offer a lot more to the conversation, and they're also a lot more durable than some of the things that we construct today. And so they can handle more neglect. But it also means that somebody has to pay the price at some point to fix that neglect. So concluding this slide, because I'm totally getting off track, the critical mass and the lovable places for all of these things, communities that continue to do both grow. So the real question that we're here to answer tonight is about achievable building projects. You know, if we believe that a critical and lovable mass is actually going to work, we need to make sure it's affordable. We need to make sure it's constructible, and it has to be done in a reasonable time frame. It doesn't do any good if we are doing all of this work and in 15 years, we're finally able to implement it. We need to be able to do something and strike while the iron is hot. If people are willing to move into the community or move to downtown specifically, how do we make that work? Every project that I've ever worked on in a historic building has some sort of funding gap, which is a great way of saying it's too expensive. So there's a lot of programs out there, whether it's a TIF fund, whether it's low interest loans, revolving loans, reinvestment programs, facade grants, community development block grants. There's a ton of stuff that's out there. I want to take just a moment here and talk through some of the ways that funding gaps can be reduced. The first piece of this, TIFs. Do you all want to pipe in and jump in for this conversation? So, everybody familiar with TIFs? Everybody like them or not? Or you have a great opinion? Show of hands now. Okay. I think there's a lot to understand about all of them, and there's a ton of communities out there that have been implementing them. I know in Bloomington we reintroduced TIFs and we've expanded some of those districts and made some modifications. Normal has had some. Most communities that we see with thriving downtowns have some sort of TIF. Do you want to talk more?
So we do have a downtown TIF, and we're working on our second extension right now. So we're heading toward 47 years of TIF. We have about 10 years left on it. But because of its age, it has a pretty healthy increment that it connects with our TIF2, which allows us to pass funds between the two TIFs. So there's a lot of opportunity that we have and that we've used throughout the years to fund different things, such as facade grants, infrastructure work downtown, and redevelopment projects. So it is definitely on the table for any kind of programs that can come out of this idea.
Okay, great. There was a little packet as you walked in. Hopefully you all picked that up, and it's about it. It has some information about some of those TIFs, and I would love to talk more about that. But as far as how that affects Pontiac, that's probably not my qualification. What I can also suggest is that there are other tools that are available. So the revolving loan fund, I don't know if anybody's seen one of those things before. Familiar with that? You've used one.
We used to have them.
So in Bloomington, we're currently, let me see if I can pull this up on the screen. Oh, PowerPoint might have locked up on me. It's a gap loan is kind of how that one works, and it's really just about making that last 20K work in that process. I think, is that enough to actually make a difference? Well, it depends on the size of the project and depends on the increment of the project and over what lifespan you're going to work on that. There are also some reinvestment programs that I think would be, all right, this thing's going to panic on me. It's not liking me right now. Maybe it does that. Nope. Hey, there we go. All right. Reinvestment programs. Anybody ever use one of these? Okay, so Landmarks Illinois has a reinvestment program that they've introduced in Chicago, and they're willing to also use that in other areas of the state. Maybe. Let me do some of these things. assist with things like pre-development costs, my fee, construction loans, operating loans when they're necessary, property acquisition. And I think there are a lot of barriers to some of these projects. But honestly, I think, well, maybe I should ask, what's the vacancy rate downtown?
Up or down?
Downstairs. What about upstairs?
I don't think it's 50. I think 25, 30.
And upstairs would be 60, 50?
Yes. Full.
Okay. These are good information pieces for me to have. You know, I've made some assumptions based on the research that I've done, but some of that is just having data, and it'll be necessary for all of this. But that's exactly what this kind of thing is about, is trying to take advantage of those. Now, you have facade grants as well. Love facade grants. We use those in Bloomington and have found them to be incredibly useful. But one of the things I'll underscore with that, roofs. Right now, your facade grant is not permitting roofs. But in Bloomington, we have found that it has saved more than one building. And part of the issue that we see is that if there has been something that is underdeveloped for a long time, usually the roof is one of the most catastrophic failure points. And so we need to see some sort of reinvestment in those. But in addition to that, something that we started introducing 4 years ago was making it a competitive program. That sounds a little bit goofy to try and do something where you're giving away money, but it actually increased the interest in the program. And so right now we have $150,000 in our coffer. And next year we're going for $300,000, and we'll see how all that plays out. Maybe the city approves it, maybe it doesn't. But because of construction costs, we need to be able to actually make a dent. And if you are a single building owner, you're only allowed to come to that coffer for that year twice. But you can get awarded up to $50,000 if it is a significantly unique project and is really, really necessary. Typically, the maximum is $25,000.
Is that front and back?
It is, yeah. And part of the reason for that is because we've had accessibility issues, and we recognize that accessibility in downtown Bloomington is absolutely necessary to get people to work in those spaces, but it also is for second floors. It's one of the best improvements that we've made because of decks, or being able to put a second stair out of the backside is one of the most nominal ways of making that change. Now, there are lots of different things that I could get lost on facade grants and how exciting they are. I love them. Hopefully you love them too. What about community development block grants?
We have not used, I was looking at them today. Funny you say that.
Yeah.
40 years.
No, grant out.
One of the biggest ones is for public infrastructure on this, and I think it's a great way of using those funds. But there's also been use of these funds in creating some revolving loan processes in the past, or low interest loans in a specific district. And I think there are a lot of ways to use this specifically for housing rehabilitation. And I think that could be a kind of a great way of making some things meet. What about historic tax credits? Anybody used historic tax credits before? Familiar with the program? Y'all are sleeping on some gold mines. Okay. This is probably one of the best things that you can do, especially as an owner-occupied structure. Reason I'm going to bring this up, let's say we have a 2,000 square foot building. And cost per square foot, let's be realistic today, we're probably going to be somewhere in the $400 square foot. And we're going to be in Illinois. Not Iowa. I promise I know how to clean. tax credits available on an initial investment, almost half of the project. So the idea behind the tax credit is that you can take it over a certain period of time to help offset income. Now, where this really comes into play is that it can also be syndicated. So banks are willing to loan money on historic tax credits sometimes. They can do it at a lower interest rate or try to create some funding sources or research some things, or maybe you get a group of people together that are interested in those. There are some folks in Aurora, I believe, that did a micro loan process in this, and they were able to come together, use those historic tax credits, break them out over multiple years, and then each person who committed to that was able to take advantage of that tax credit to offset their own income for the next year. It's a great way of making things work, and there are requirements. And the biggest one for historic tax credits is that it needs to be a National Register district or National Register landmark property of some kind. But one of the defining figures of that, or defining necessities in order to achieve that, is integrity. Y'all have more integrity downtown for existing buildings than most places I've seen. Even Bloomington, with all the storefronts that we have a National Register district. And with all these different modifications, we have the eligibility to pick up federal and state grants. You would as well. I have no doubt that we could make something work with that. But the meat and potatoes of our conversation tonight, because I'm not an expert on the funding sources, like I said, I only claim to be on TV, is that we need to be able to figure out how to reduce the investment costs, whether it's a second floor, whether it's renovating a first floor, whether it's changing a building out or making something work, and using the existing building codes to reduce the investment that is initial to the project. So let me get back to my Anybody ever use the existing building code? Only use the new building codes?
Shows the number we used existing. And
now, when I say existing building code, it's the International Existing Building Code, post 2012. Maybe. IBC is sort of the default. And the reason I bring that up is because there's an expectation in IBC of the International Building Code of this is the baseline, this is the minimum. And existing building codes are far more development friendly. So some building standards, and this is something that we've been working with Pontiac on. But this year, new updates were required by the state, and we're now in the 2024 cycle. And as of 2 days ago, the Energy Conservation Code changed to 2024. Probably, I didn't know until I looked this up just right before I did this presentation. And so I thought everybody might want to be aware of that. But one of the big components that we see is that the International Building Code is what's enforced, or it's what's expected, and then it is enforced by default, not necessarily because it has to be. So there are a lot of compliance paths. You can still use the International Building Code, but if you use the existing building code and you have a lot more flexibility built in, we have a lot easier time making some of these older buildings work. Now, when you use the International Building Code, you are much more likely to have a predictable project outcome. And the reason for that is because everybody in the process is more familiar. That's what we're doing with traditional building practices today, is complying with International Building Code. But if we have a little bit of flexibility that we work with the city, and we end up putting your poor code official to the test on everything, then there's some flexibility to be gained. And that spectrum across there, where you have regularity and consistency versus the judgment calls for all of that, is where the international existing building code comes into play. It is about allowing code alternatives and modifications. So right here, all I'm talking about on this slide is just to say the code official has some authority, has some leeway to allow things in existing construction that would not ordinarily be permitted in new construction. Now, if it's a life safety measure, if an egress sort of thing, or it's a general safety sort of thing, a little bit less. But let's say you have an existing wall that was a corridor at some point, and it's got plaster and lath on it. Pretty common in an existing building. Well, by rights, the existing building code says that's a 1-hour wall. But if you were to try and calculate that out based on the new building code, it'd be 45 minutes. It wouldn't last. So there's already some flexibility built in there where you don't have to go and change the mural on the side of DeLong's stairway that goes upstairs. Might know that one from experience. Now, there are even within the existing building code compliance paths. The first is the prescriptive compliance method, which is ultimately going to kick you right back to the IBC. Second is the work area method. And the work area method is to say, okay, I'm just going to replace some carpet or some paint, or I want to change the trim out in this room. Not that big of a deal. You can do what you need to do, and it's not going to trigger a whole bunch of changes. But level 2 says, hey, now I'm going to start changing doors, windows, reconfiguring some things. Maybe I'm going to start modifying some things that affect life safety or egress or something like that. And then level 3 is where it kicks it up, and we're doing that kind of thing over more than half of the building. Now, keeping in mind, this is the building area. Building area can be defined as your basement, first floor, second floor, you've got third floor. So one level of that may not trigger that. You may still be able to stay within the level 2 alteration by only changing one floor. Continuing on with some of this, if you've tried to modify a building downtown at some point and you've used your IBC, one of the biggest problems that we consistently see is sprinkler systems. By rights in the International Building Code, you are required to put in a sprinkler system. But in the International Existing Building Code, it assumes that if you don't have sufficient municipal water supply, which most of the buildings in downtown don't, then you have an exception. Now, you can have an automatic smoke detection system to make something like that comply, or you can have some other ways of making that work. But it does provide some allowances for that. Now, one of the things that is specifically missing in here is I2. If you are a nursing home, you still have to sprinkler. Another compliance path, historic buildings. So a lot of the buildings downtown, as I understand it, are not historic. Is that right?
They're not on the register. Right.
Yeah, not on the register. What about local designation?
We have not done that.
So perhaps if you consider historic buildings, you might be able to do something alternative. So let's say I wanted to embrace automatic sprinkler systems, for instance, and I say I'm going to go ahead and put that in the building. Well, now you pretty much don't have to do anything else if it is historic. Just some little trades here, but one of the other things I want to point out here is that it can be designated as historic under an applicable state or local law. It does not necessarily require national register for it to comply with the code. Now, historic tax credits, on the other hand, does need to be on the register. A couple of the other things I think are really important. Existing non-conforming materials need not be surfaced with an approved fire retardant coating. Now this is specifically because we see a lot of tin ceilings. You've got your first floor, maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it's a retail shop of some kind, and then above there you want to put an apartment. So you end up having to put a sprinkler system in order to compensate for the 1 hour separation that would be required between these two. And you still want to keep the beauty of that tin ceiling. Now I've got tricks for that. But one of these here that I talked about already, where the existing wall and ceiling finish is wood lath and plaster. That's specifically done because of stairways, because of corridors, where you see that separation that's coming upstairs. By rights, if you're using this as historic, you have some flexibility in that.
I just want to ask a question. When you talk about historic buildings, the mention was not on the registry. So I assume that there's a process that they have to go to get on the registry, and that might hinder some of their thoughts here.
I think it depends on whether you want to go for tax credits. If you want to go for tax credits, then the National Register would be necessary. If you only want to go for compliance, local registration is all that's required. And that could be forming a historic district in a very simple way, where all you're doing is saying these buildings within this area are historic and these are the qualifications for that. That program, we introduced it in Bloomington in 1987. And I've got plenty of model stuff that we could share with you for all of that. Has been wonderful.
But there really is not, from the city's perspective, the downside to that designation, because the building owner wouldn't necessarily have to take the historic route. They chose not.
Correct. Yeah. You could absolutely be more stringent than that as a building owner if you want. Say, hey, we want to make something a little bit different. Now, the whole point of the historic district is to create integrity and maintain integrity in all of that. But if you meet that criteria, and that could be something where you say it's only the facade that we're going to have any purview over, and then whatever you want to protect with funds that come out of that. That's an approach that I think works well. Now, of course, when we're looking at historic buildings, we still need to be structurally sound and resolve dangerous conditions, which should be expected of pretty much any approach. But there is one more compliance method, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this tonight. It's the performance compliance path. So in the existing building code, we can come up with a grading system. We can look at an existing building, and we can say, if you achieve so many points in different categories, we're going to deem that you're okay. Part of the reason for this is because older building codes like BOCA, the Universal Building Code, and lots of codes that happened before, had different metrics for what safety were. Now, we've had conversations with the city on this, and there are lots of tools out there, and we've had lots of ways of trying to approach this. But right now in IEBC, this is a very easy process if you have a cool spreadsheet. Otherwise, it could be a little tedious looking. But here's how it goes. Okay, so you're going to be evaluated on 3 categories: fire safety, means of egress, and general safety. And you have to meet minimum criteria in each one of these. But here's the idea. So let's say I have an existing building right now where maybe the stair shaft doesn't work out, so it's a little bit low. Maybe my HVAC needs a little bit of improvement. It's controlling too many floors. There's too much air moving between these levels. Maybe my fire detection system, all my smoke detectors are not everywhere that they're supposed to. Maybe maybe I don't have a sprinkler system in the building and I don't have an elevator. Well, I achieved this red line down here. That does not meet the minimum performance score. But the idea behind the performance compliance path is not to make everything meet. It's to make aggregate of the building meet compliance. So if we improve the HVAC, the fire detection, and the fire alarm system, for instance, our scores would be improved. We would achieve compliance without ever changing the sprinkler system, the elevators, or the stair assembly. This is an incredible tool. And I cannot emphasize enough how absolutely useful this is, because it can mean you're not putting a sprinkler system in. It can mean that you're using existing corridor walls. It can mean that you're using old building types and windows and doors and things that may not be compliant by right, but because you're being a little bit safer by putting in a really Cadillac fire alarm system, which is a significantly reduced investment versus a sprinkler system, you are able to achieve these ratings. So, different occupancy types. Who has a restaurant downtown? Nobody? That would be probably A2, maybe A1 if you're really small, or B. What about just a retail shop? Yeah, those retail shops. So M, that's you right there. Storage building? No? Nothing there? Nobody's got a nursing home, right? Okay, this is good. Good news. It's a little bit more complicated than you got now. All right. So I want to walk through just quickly what an evaluation would actually look like. Shout out tonight to Jake Hag at Acres Inn. He has graciously allowed us to use his building as a model for this conversation. So a little bit, oh, I gotta find my mouse. Somewhere. Okay. Maybe. Okay. So upstairs in this space, Jake had, I think, a state grant that helped put this together for him at one point, and talked a little bit about what that looked like upstairs. It's approximately 38 by 58, and there are some load-bearing walls here in the center of the building and on either side, which this is pretty typical of a downtown. It's about 20 feet here to 20 feet there, a little bit less than by the time you count the interior clearances. And as we look at the space, there's potential opportunity to redevelop this with 2 apartments upstairs, where you could have apartment A on the Madison Street side, and then on the alley side, you could have apartment B. And this works out just lovely in terms of plan, but it has some significant challenges in other ways. So what we can do, gonna come over to that screen eventually, guys. There we go. Try to make it a little bigger this time. We can look at this building from a couple of perspectives. So those apartments are upstairs, and then he has what will eventually become an Acres Inn expansion on the bottom level. At least that's the intent for right now. I don't want to speak for him, but we're headed. So this is upstairs. We're going to first start on that level, and then we actually have to do this when we do it twice. We have to do it on the upstairs and on the downstairs level. We have to take the worst condition of both levels when we do it. The construction type is 3B. That's what we call is ordinary construction. And if I come over here, I can select these different things, and that's just based on IBC. Is the building fully sprinklered? No, it's not right now. Maybe in the future, maybe not. We can calculate the existing building height, the number of stories, and all of these are straightforward from IBC. Only takes a couple of minutes to find these out. But what it does is it gives you a value for all of this. And one of the reasons that it's talking about this is, can a ladder from a fire truck reach all of the applicable stories? That's what this is really trying to get at. That's what this magical 55 feet is really about, because that's the typical height at which a fire ladder will reach. Okay, so building area. Now we have to calculate this because perhaps there is a portion of this where the building on the frontage, as it meets the street or it meets the alley, cannot be accessed by a fire truck. Maybe the windows on the front, maybe the windows on the back, maybe there's a problem with all of it. Well, we calculate the perimeter of the entire building. That includes the sidewalls and all of this. And then we calculate the perimeter that actually fronts on a public way. We don't count alleys when we do this calculation. But then there's the width of the public way. So Madison Street, approximately 60 feet of access there. It doesn't matter if I say 45 feet. It only matters that it's more than 30. That's what a fire truck needs. And then what that gives us is there's an allowable area per story. That's what this is saying. The building itself is not 16,000 square feet. Be pretty serious. The actual building area there on the second floor, not necessarily on the first here, but is about 2,200 square feet. So this gives us a calculation for all the safety parameters in the building. There's something called compartmentation. So let's say we had individual portions of buildings. If I were to go back to Jake's, I could say that brick wall in the middle, we could compartmentalize that to two separate buildings, meaning you could have a business on part of it, and then you could have another residence on the other part of it. Fortunately, because these are the same type of occupancy on the second floor, we could calculate this all as one compartment. So that's where this 2,200 is coming in. Then we get into tenant and dwelling unit separations. So this is going to be as it will be, not necessarily what it is right now, but we pop it with my little tooltip. So no fire partitions, incomplete fire partitions, no doors, doors not self-closing or automatic closing. So if I were to pick that, you can see over here, it's going to start changing some points on this. And maybe there are different scenarios where it's better than it's expected. But in most buildings, what we see is that this does not work. We don't have the fire partitions that we're supposed to have between dwelling units or between the floor below. And that's because the tin ceiling that's on there is actually really great at catching fire. Sparks don't catch as easily, but it spreads fire more rapidly. And then the dwelling unit separations, we usually don't have the continuity between there. It could be transom windows. It could be that something has been altered throughout the years. It could be that somebody opened up a plaster wall, cut a little piece out, and they put drywall back in there, and now we've got holes in there that are not totally compliant. So usually this doesn't work out. Now corridor walls, this gives you a lot of points. It's one of the biggest bang for the buck categories that we have. So right now, the -7 here versus working all the way up gives us to a +2. But what this is that if I have corridor walls that are fire rated, that actually work, and I can get people out of the building, that's what this is about. I can get people out of the building safely from wherever they're at, then it allows me to take more points on this. We'll get to this. So because we would be laying out a lot of this as new, we can make this comply with IBC. So this would be category C. So vertical openings, this would be like your stair shafts or an elevator shaft or maybe a mechanical chase that runs the length of the building. If you have 1 to 2 hours on all of that, and that there's a maximum number of floors connected, you get a certain amount of points for that. That's all that's about. I could get lost in that for way too long. Now, HVAC systems. One of the issues that we see in a lot of existing buildings, you have some sort of chase and it feeds multiple levels from one system. That's a big no-no. And one of the reasons for that is because it's a great place for smoke and for fire to get through and spread to all the levels. If it feeds only one level, you get the best amount of points for that. The system serves only one story, or it's a boiler chiller system that only connects the one level or maybe 2 levels. This is where we get one of the bigger bangs for the buck as well, automatic fire detection. I bet everybody has a smoke detector in their house, right? Somewhere over a bedroom door. And it also has an alarm built in to let you know that something's happening. Now, this is different because a fire alarm system is different than automatic fire detection. Detection here is just making sure that we understand the heat or the smoke, wherever those might be. And then the alarm system is the notification device, which might be a strobe, it might be a horn somewhere else, some way of letting people know that they need to get out of the building. And if these can comply, I can pretty well make most of this work. Okay, coming back. Smoke control. Now this is especially important where you have a big atrium, a big open space. We see this in hotels sometimes. Project that I worked on, good grief, almost 20 years ago, down in Clinton. There's a hotel there that has needed a lot of work for a long time. And one of the issues that they have is that there's a big atrium on one side of it. It has a grand stair that leads up. In order to be able to control that space, I mean, that's a great chimney space, but in order to be able to control that space, we need a smoke control system of some kind. We need to be able to create a perimeter in there. We can enclose the exit stairway or with a smoke-proof enclosure, which might involve a curtain that comes down. It could be a series of dampers, or it could be a very complicated and expensive HVAC system that sucks all of the smoke out of the building. I don't think anybody wants to spend the money on that when it's already difficult as it is. So I think the right answer for a building like that is to try and enclose it as much as possible. But in this instance, where we are, we don't have to have any kind of smoke control system because it's already separated. Means of egress here. So you have to compare IBC and the existing building code in this one. Makes it a little bit time consuming. But the idea is that if you can meet the capacity requirements like we would have today, so a 3-foot door has approximately 180 occupants that it will allow through. That's a pretty common number. Now, if I only had one exit in this room and I have more than 49 people in here, I'm no longer code compliant. But we have 2 exits. And so what this is about is making sure that we have adequate means of egress, and that's something that would have to be calculated typically by an architect. So then dead ends. A dead end corridor, if you have a dead end that is longer than typically 20 feet or in a sprinkler building 50 feet, then it's a problem. And the idea is that if a beam were to fall while it's on fire, for instance, it would block your means of escape. So we don't want a bunch of dead ends anywhere in a building. Fortunately, because the new length of this would all lead to a stair, there are no dead ends. So the exit access travel distance. This is where we say, okay, I'm on the 2nd floor, I'm in the far back corner of the building, I'm maybe tucked in the bathroom, and I need to be able to get out to the far other corner of the building. Can I still get there? So the maximum length of this building is 96 feet. Look what happened to my general safety. So now we have a problem, and we've got to bring that score up to 38 points. That's what this is about. If I make a couple of clever moves with the architectural plan, can I get it down to, say, 75? Because if I can, suddenly I pass. So another one of these categories, elevator control. Now this, sometimes you have existing elevators and they are very difficult to try to retrofit or make work. But some of them, if they have emergency control and they can bring somebody, the idea is if you're in a wheelchair, you're on 2nd floor, I need to be able to get out of the building safely. If that stair is too small for me to be able to sit on the landing while a firefighter comes and rescues me, I now have a problem. So the elevator needs to be able to take me down to the 1st level and then shut off. That's the idea. So right now we don't have an elevator, so it doesn't hurt us in any way. So we should say, oh wait, yes, here? Yeah, yes. Yeah, less than 25. Okay, emergency lighting. Now this one should be a given in most buildings, that there are combo heads right there on that exit light. If you've got those, you're in good shape. What about 2 or more exits? Maybe I only have 1 exit from the building. Not a big deal. It only gives you another point. Now, mixed occupancies. This is a critical one. This is where if we have a 2nd floor and then we have a floor below it, we now have to consider these as 2 different things. And the way that this is calculated here, category B, this is making sure that we comply. We have a 1-hour fire separation between, say, business that's on one floor and residential that's on the second. Now, it might be that this is category A. Look what happened here. Fail again. Have to figure out some other place to make that work. So there's lots of different considerations for all of these things that affect one another. But the biggest one here we're trying to avoid is having to put standpipes and sprinkler systems in, because that's infrastructure costs. That's things that suddenly make this unattainable. And right now, these are the maximum scores that we can get. We're not required. We would not have to, or we would have to put one in by rights, but we can't. Incidental uses, those are sometimes very small rooms, might be a big boiler room, or might be a scullery kitchen in the basement somewhere. This is something that we'll have to work through only after the plan is completed. Smoke compartmentation, that's a slightly different animal than a smoke control system. But the idea is that, let's say you have a couple of those atria near each other. We want to be able to still get those completely independently working. And then occupancy specifications for all these things. This is about I2, and this is its own category. Fortunately, we're not I2 in any of this. Again, no nursing homes, so it makes that a lot easier. So the only thing we need to do to make this comply is to bring general safety up somewhere. And if we look around and we say, okay, well, maybe I need to bring some of these things up. What are the ways that I can do that? This is a really quick tool, comparatively, to be able to say, all right, all I need to do is increase the fire rating of a couple of things. Let's say I'm going to make this work a little bit better. I can extra fire rate my corridors. And then we're going to make sure that we have 2 exits. And let's see here. Make sure I get the right one selected. We're going to make this work with category B. And we can come down here, and I can make one of these other things work, and suddenly I can fly. Minimal changes to the actual architecture of the building, minimal changes to the actual costs of involvement in the building. This could be a couple of layers of drywall, and it can comply. Okay. Yeah.
The new codes, what is the fire rating for all between commercial and retail?
Sure. Let's look it up. I remember right off the top of my head, but I. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned an hour, that's why.
Yeah, so with sprinklering, you actually get a little bit less for some of those things. If you're not sprinklering, yeah, let's see here. Okay. No, there it is. I might be use that. All right, separation. So you have 2 ways of calculating for this. If you had, say, a B and a B, you wanted to be able to put a business above, no separation required. There is such a thing as a non-separated occupancy where you calculate for the worst case scenario. Typically, dwelling units are not allowed to do that unless there's only one dwelling unit. There's ways to calculate for that. But generally, so if we're looking at the separation of M over here, non-sprinklered, and we have a restaurant on the first floor, it's 2 hours. If we have mercantile on the first floor, and we end up with, where's my R? Ooh, I lost it. There we go. For this guy, oh yeah, yep, we have 2 hours as well. Now, there are exceptions to some of those things, again, because of the historic nature of them, that allow you to reduce some of that by accepting an existing assembly. And one of the best tricks for some of that is achieving the fire rating through intumescent paint. Anybody ever? What? Intumescent paint. Anybody ever heard of that? Yeah? Intumescent paint is often applied to the bottom of a tin ceiling. And I'm not preaching the gospel of one particular product tonight, but I do know that this particular product has been used, and I think even in this community, where the idea is that if you apply it to the bottom of a surface, you can achieve an additional rating on top of it. It swells like a marshmallow when you burn it. And when it does that, it creates a fire barrier, kind of a char layer on top of that to prevent the stuff underneath it from burning. And we've been able to make a lot of tin ceilings work just with this. That's correct. So they have testing and certifications for all of this. It has to be applied in a very specific way, meet a minimum dry film thickness, all that sort of stuff. But once it does, it's great. Okay, biggest bang for the buck items on all of this. Smoke detection and fire alarm systems. If you do both of those, you're minus 25 to plus 9. That is by far one of the best things that you can do. That's what you do at home, right? And of course, compartmentation. If we can get all the fire barriers that are required, this is one of those things where if we can put it between the two levels and make sure that that complies, that's going to be a biggest bang for the buck as well. Corridors really hurt us because people can't get out of the buildings if you don't have an assembly that actually works. So if we can make corridors work, we should in every instance. And some of that can also be achieved with an intumescent coating, rather than trying to change the whole wall out. Now, the biggest issue that I'm seeing for sure with a lot of the downtown area, while it might be more economical to sprinkler the entire downtown over the very, very long term, it doesn't really go back to our initial idea. We need to be able to solve it now as much as possible. Strike while the iron is hot. Because the sprinkler system also permits you lots of other things, and it may lower insurance costs as well. And there's a lot more flexibility with those. You saw, in that table that the S there for sprinkler reduces it by an hour. Maybe there's less work that's involved if you go that route. But we just don't have that as being a feasible option right now. We just don't have the infrastructure for it. Maybe there's a time where we do. A couple other things to note. So I only addressed IBC so far in the International Existing Building Code, but energy code compliance is a real question. A lot of existing buildings struggle to meet new codes. If I go in and I change my furnace, you're expecting it to be the newest and highest and best. And I think that's also true of commercial buildings. But what ends up happening more often than not is that we're sort of behind. Some of the technology is a little bit behind on where it should be. And so you can't quite achieve all the results that you're supposed to with energy codes. And so it gets fudged a little bit, and then later you end up spending more money on something else. But one of the biggest things that we see all the time is people burning money on windows. This is a real problem. So when you go in and you replace a new window, you put this new beautiful vinyl window in, and it looks nothing like the character around it. And it's only going to last 10 years. What you're supposed to do for energy code compliance is upgrade that window to the newest and best thing. And so your U value might end up being a 0.28, which is really, really high for a window. And if you end up having to go and replace a bunch of windows on the front of your building, it suddenly becomes very costly as well. Now I can't just put in this old frame. I have to change pieces of the facade out. And it happens all the time, especially on second floors where we have to put in an egress window that is of the right size. And I can't find one off the shelf. I end up having to have somebody custom make to fit this opening. And now this thing has to meet certain energy criteria and go through all of those things. Well, that's what this was for, is that historic buildings in particular are already allowed by right to not have to comply. But in addition, other buildings exempt by the IECC. So this is what it says about those things. Additions, alterations, repairs, and changes of occupancy to, that's what has to comply. But it doesn't say that an existing building as it sits has to comply. It doesn't say that I have to try and bring up everything else in the building. And if I have a broken window, that I can't do a like-for-like replacement. That's the word we're looking for, like-for-like replacement. The other big code question that we get a lot is about accessibility. And really the accessibility code is, the idea is to force us to try to consider as many people as possible and to try and make it work for as many people as possible. But it's specific to say where existing elements or spaces are altered, then you have to make those modifications compliant. It does not say that you have to put in an elevator in a 3-story building. In fact, technically infeasible alterations, residential dwelling units not required to be accessible, or multi-story housing, which is specifically identified as more than 3 stories, doesn't say that we end up having to make those accessible. It's already by right allowing us not to. And elevators, of course, are always the big question. And there's a cost analysis that you're supposed to do when you look at the new construction of a project. If it exceeds 20% of the cost of the overall alteration, you don't have to put one in. Now, this is pretty easy to not hit right now because a new elevator could be $200,000. Easy. And if the entirety of your project is that, I mean, that's not going to work out. So the point is here is that a lot of these codes are specifically written to allow for some flexibility. So some success stories.
Paul, before you go on,
Yeah.
are there conditions, let's say occupancy or number of residential units upstairs that would just kick in? You have to have sprinklers no matter what.
No. I mean, if in the performance compliance path, you could not make it work, and without a sprinkler system, then yes, I suppose that would be the case, but that's a pretty difficult exception. Any other thoughts? So one of the best things that I can possibly give you is this list of success stories and resources. All right, let's go to place economics. This is fantastic. Has everybody visited this? Anybody ever heard of this? Seen it? Familiar with it? Impact of historic tax credits investments in Illinois. This organization is in DC. This is all they do, is they study this kind of stuff. They want to make sure that if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, and it actually makes some sort of difference. And so they go through literally every line, and they look at all of the details, all of the costs, and all of the key findings, and make sure that it is digestible. And what we're learning in all of this is that these programs are really successful, except for really large buildings, or buildings that have been derelict for 20 years, 30 years, because they need so much work that it's impossible to bring them up cost effectively. Or the building footprint is so weird. Like a great example is in Danville. There's a hotel in Danville that was studied to be modified. They did not use the performance compliance path. They tried to make it work with IBC and using some of the work area methods for it, and ended up that the project was infeasible to put an addition on, and ultimately the whole thing got demolished. Really great success story, right, Paul? Okay. But that's what ends up happening, because there are certain things where if you're not using all the tools that are available to your disposal, it's not going to pencil out. You can't make those things work. And That's why these codes exist, but you have to dig into them. I think the most challenging part about having a historic building is you have to do a ton of research. And it just takes a lot of time. And you really need the right people, the right partners, and the right timing to be able to make it work. So I'd encourage you to spend a little bit of time looking at all of this. And it really goes through and gives you a ton of details about what payback looks like, about how those tax credits have given various communities a leg up. The information that is in here is fantastic, but one of the key findings that they have based on this, spoiler alert, is that reinvesting in downtowns, particularly on second floors for residential purposes, is totally worth it. Go figure. So what it should be. In addition to that, incentives development. This would be a phenomenal thing that I could recommend wholeheartedly to all of you fine folks here in Pontiac, because they will assist you with coming through some of these things. They have some consulting and some workshops that they'll put on as well, but it's simply lovely. Next piece of this puzzle, upstairs downtown. If you have not been there, you need to go. This is a really wonderful website. And for all of my pontificating up here tonight, they actually have done some homework. And so this is an example in Springfield. It's on 300 Adams Street. And what they did is the pro forma. They looked at the plan, this really goofy long building, and looked at how this could work out. And one of the things that they came up with, you'll notice that these bedrooms don't actually have any outside windows. There are ways to achieve that, but you have to sprinkler the building. There are ways to make some of these things work, but it requires some ingenuity. Maybe it's a studio, maybe it's an efficiency apartment of some kind. Maybe there are other ways of making those things pencil out. But they had the advantage of having an existing elevator, and that they were able to reuse some of it and end up creating 9 units in the building. Now, what this ends up becoming, we can skip some of this, although it is really pretty to look at these beautiful images, is that this little thing right here is where the meat of all of this is. So at 9 units and penciling out what the rent would be at each one of these, and this is based in July 2021, what does that do if I take advantage of tax credits or not taking advantage of tax credits? Sorry, I need to go back. And open that one up. Okay, so what they talk about here is the first mortgage piece. And then if you were to get community block loans, and then if you were ending up able to use the federal tax credit, not the Illinois tax credit, but just the federal tax credit. And what this doesn't take into account is any facade grants or revolving loans or some of the other resources that we talked about tonight. And it still pencils out. Now, it's not great, admittedly, at a 1.04 debt coverage ratio. Excuse me, that's the year 8. This one is about a 15%. It does pencil out, though. That's still better than the S&P.
Occasional vacancies, or is that just assumed?
So yeah, so what they did here is they assumed generally a solid case scenario for all of it, but they were conservative on some of the numbers. So I think like some of the repairs, you're presuming that in the first 8 years you're not going to have to do a bunch of repairs right off the bat. Insurance, maybe that's real expensive right off the back because it's a historic building, but how does that all play out in the long term? Sorry. Don't want ChatGPT. Not my law. Anyway, so I think this is a really valuable resource. I would recommend spending some time on this website and just going through some of the case studies that they had done. Ultimately, I think the building owners for this project didn't end up doing it because they got sidetracked with another project. But there are even some more case studies on here. In Sydney, there's some great information. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Downtown Bloomington. So, performance compliance path. This was a project that we had done as part of my predecessor's work back in 2001 to 2003. And this ended up becoming a lot of condos. Now, there's some struggles with condos, let me tell you, when it comes to financing, because of the way that those loans are structured over a certain period of time. They had to get 50% occupancy before they could actually make the thing pencil out, which means somebody had to take a big gamble at the beginning of the project. Now, ultimately, they were able to make it work, but this is the problem. That is 6 stories of wood building on the interior. There is no way I can make that comply with the building code or the existing building code without using the performance compliance path. We had to come up with ways of making that work. And so we went through all the rigmarole and put that criteria together, and it works. Now the building is pseudo-divided into 2 parts. This actually stretches 2 blocks, or both sides of a block. Kind of make it out every time I hover over it. It's a problem though. But this faces on toward Main Street, and then on the other side, excuse me, Center Street. And then on the other side, it faces toward the square. But has ultimately sold everything. It just took him 20 years. So anyway, if you can, don't do a condo. It's really expensive. All right. I talked a little bit about this earlier about the Rust grant, and that's what we use in Bloomington. But again, going back to the competitive part of all of that. So what we learned in this process, doing it competitively, is that we had 5 people who were always trying to submit every year. And now it has become a legitimate competition because everybody wants to go for the 50K, not just for the 25K. And it has really changed the face of a lot of buildings downtown Bloomington. And because we are also allowing it to be used for painting, for roofs, for windows systems, we've had a lot more conversation with building owners, and we've created a lot more viability. But one of the biggest things that's been helpful is it's great for accessibility. We have a ton of buildings in downtown Bloomington that have a 6-inch step off of the sidewalk or more. So putting ramps in, putting an elevator in one of those areas, it has been a game changer for making that thing work. In addition to that, we have an overlay that just so happens to work with the enterprise zone in Bloomington. And for a lot of it, it also overlaps the TIF district. So we have lots of these things in play. And so it just really is about creating that critical mass rolling forward. Before I get into any of the rest of this, because these are more links that I would love to share with you all, these are websites that you should get into. I want to check on downtown Pontiac projects and learn a little bit about what has been most successful. Which projects have been the most transformative in the community?
I was involved in one state architect.
Mike Jackson?
Years ago. He came up with the building.
Yeah. I learned from him. He was my mentor.
And I met with Jeff downtown.
Yeah.
And we did an apartment bookstore. Building next to it was a 1-story building. We cut a whole through the wall and put a deck out on top of that. So we had a patio. And to start with, it was such a nightmare because we're west. I've been able to Brian Tell came through here in the 830s. He wanted all the retail spaces he could get, so he took out stairways. He closed up doorways going upstairs. In one of my buildings, they redid the downstairs, the cafe. But in the second floor, they ran all the conduit and all the electrical boxes on top of the floor upstairs. So your place to start. But the one we did on the front of the square turned out very successful. You know, on money.
Good.
But it lent itself to that. So many of them don't. The one thing when you talked about Jake's having entrance front door, one on the back door, there's not going to be any parking in the parking. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, only parking. The new Route 66 park. Centennial Park. So those are just issues. I mean, just some massive capital. So, and to think, when you said it's better than the S&P, I guarantee S&P is a lot less work.
That's true. I tell you what.
So let me answer that though. I am an investor and I understand that, but we see what we're trying to do downtown here is to develop residents above the retail establishments, and that in itself transforms the downtown. Okay? So to me, when you say what's transformative, anyone who now has already done something and put Airbnbs or something above their places right now, your daughter, the Cup and Stone, that's transformative to me. That's making a difference to the downtown. That's making people want to live here. It will attract new stores, entertainment, which will drop that age category here because they want to stay downtown, they want to party downtown, they want to eat, they want to shop. And to me, that's the transformative definition of it.
Yeah, I think a couple of good examples would be the Cup and Stone. That's become a very popular place. And then Bob and Ringo's was a big transformational piece that took a bar with a bad reputation and turned it into a restaurant that's very well used. And that whole project included acquiring a property and moving the existing owner of that property to another building to make room for event space attached to that building. So that's been, to the downtown, I think it's just been completely transformed.
We did the same, what used to be the Sator Strike store. We converted that to 4 apartments upstairs. We did own that space.
Yeah.
That's for 30 years. People have been living there ever since.
That's excellent.
Those are also examples of individual owners who have taken advantage of the side grants and things that the city has been able to, and we've been very transparent. We make those things clearly known yearly, annually.
Yeah. Well, and let me underscore some of this too, because the owner-occupied structures and being able to create enough transformation with some of these buildings, that's so difficult in a lot of communities because you have 4 or 5 landlords that own these properties but don't actually invest in them, or they're investing on a cycle of every 15 years or something. And because they own such a large quantity of it, they can't ever achieve critical mass on a block or on 2 blocks or anywhere in the downtown. So it is so difficult to try to get everybody invested in the same program when you have some of those spaces. But you're fortunate. You have something really remarkable here because there are so many people that are interested in continuing to develop their own properties. And if you can, creating that critical mass. But it's about sequencing. It's about making some of those things happen all at once, if possible. Maybe everybody's in the same boat and everybody's winning the lottery tomorrow. But I kind of doubt it.
One thing with the state, our grant, was a block where the car museum is at. Bank, car museum. We applied for a grant for an elevator because the car museum actually has basement full of amazing stuff on the 2nd floor. But all these buildings are 16 foot, 1/4 to the next. And to climb a straight 16-foot set of stairs over the 43-year-old average limit here is a real trick. So we looked at an elevator, then we looked at central elevator on that block with forward.
Great idea.
But we didn't get the grant. And I don't know if that's feasible, but
So not Naperville. It's Galena ended up doing something very similar to that, where they took the back side of the alley side of a bunch of buildings and then used one elevator to meet them.
we don't have any parking at all. But that would open up that whole second floor. So
Absolutely. I mean, another way to achieve that without ever actually having to add on is you essentially create a corridor that ties all these buildings together. Now everybody has to agree to it, but it's possible. It has been done.
the building line is 2 stories, one of them drops down to 1 story, so we looked at putting a glass walkway one to the other, so we could access the house. But it's a really good idea. We just couldn't get the grant.
Yeah. I think with some of those grants, it is about saying the right words and the magic incantation to be able to get those things to fruition. And we've seen some success recently. Now, as far as the tax credits and that sort of thing, we just haven't had a lot of people apply for it. So I couldn't give you good data on that. But the grant that we just got for the the healthcare transformation grant through CDB. Never mind. They ended up giving us 21.7, but it was need based, and so being able to show that it was going to transform the community and put all those criteria together. There are grant writers who are really good at that kind of thing, and Mike Jackson would definitely be my first call on some of those things. Well, also Quinn Adamowski. Mike Jackson's not. No, he's working now for upstairs downtown. That's his primary love. Yeah. But he's also doing some stuff for the Association for Preservation Technologies, and I highly recommend it. And look, I even have links for everybody on that. So I can get back to my. Nope, gotta go left. Highly recommend visiting some of these websites. We'll make sure that we give all of these to you. But it's so lovely. Get over to it. Nope. I opened up beforehand thinking that I was going to end up having an issue with it. But like we talked about the intumescent paint, they've done that research on a bunch of other things too, where there are different strategies that are available. It could be plumbing systems where, for instance, you have old cast iron pipes that are going through and you end up having to put some sort of fire retardant coating or something on them. It can work out really, really well because they've already figured out the products that work. So tons of information on that. Or it could be restoration of a particular type of masonry in your building, or some sort of wood that you can't get anymore, or window systems, or whatever it might be. Great resource. Can't recommend it enough. And since I messed up my little setup here, there's also some resources from I think this one's from Alabama. But they put some great information in here about how a lot of the same things that I'm saying tonight, but if you really want to dig into it, I think it can really create some great conversation. One more I wanted to touch on. So Aurora, this is where I shamelessly stole a a slide from and threw that into the presentation here, because it is such a good idea to be able to go through some of this and recap it later. I'm never going to be able to describe it as well as what they did for all of this, but using certain compliance paths can really create a lot more simplicity, and it's about leveraging those. This is kind of a fascinating one. This is actually the prescriptive compliance path, and it actually makes it easier. So anyway, it's a little bit based on the building type. Okay, go back to my other little slide here. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Any questions? Things
You mentioned $400 per foot. What is that? That goes everything else.
So it depends on the building, but I'm using that based on what we're seeing right at this moment for the pantograph adaptive reuse project that we're working on at Bloomington. It sits right around $400 a square foot.
And that's with a good structure on the outside.
So that's with a good structure on the outside, but a complete gut and restarting over on everything except the stairs. And then we're also putting a small addition on the north side of it. A lot of the cost is asbestos abatement, is having to comply with some of the grant guidelines from PLA to BEP to work out a bunch of these different details. But what actually really helped us is that we saved almost $500,000 by getting historic designation for the building, because we don't have to go through and insulate a bunch of the exterior envelope, and we don't have to change out the stairs. It's a huge, huge change. Other questions? Yeah, no, please.
How long does it take to get a historic district designation?
I would allow at least 18 months.
For local or?
Well, it depends. So for local, you guys could do that tomorrow. It's gonna be fun, right?
Well, we're not.
Thank you, man. But we actually went for some designation with Cullum. There just wasn't enough integrity there left. We had an interested party that really wanted to make the downtown a little bit more vibrant. And great people to work with, and we did all the exploration, talked through with the state, but ultimately the state couldn't recommend it. The process for the district nomination, it starts out, you go do a little bit of survey of the properties, you're going to take a lot of photographs, you're going to get a bunch of information together, you're going to fill out this really long form, you're going to get all sorts of different things all tied in, and then that goes to the state. The state does the initial review of all this before they recommend it on the National Park Service, and they will tell you right off the bat if there's stuff that isn't going to work. That part is quick. The National Park Service, see you next year. So.
Yeah, so one other thing we were hoping to elicit for anyone here that maybe has been considering building residential upstairs and letting us kind of know why you haven't, or what obstacles that you've seen or feel like are preventing that from happening.
Where are they gonna park? If you're running downtown, where are you gonna park? We have parking lot. We have hundreds of spaces. Okay, so the people who have the shop downtown are already thinking about parking. So if you have 20 more cars and you don't have customers, because you have to walk 2 blocks.
Yeah, it is a challenge. I think it's best to reference other communities with some of those things. We do see a lot of designated parking lots that are for overnight stays, and those tend to be a little bit more persuasive, because if you live somewhere downtown, you're usually willing to walk a little bit further. Now, if it's groceries, I understand. We're gonna have a conversation about that later, but there's lots of reasons to be able to put some of those somewhere. And I think for a lot of the amenities in downtown Pontiac, y'all are blessed with parking. Come to Bloomington, come to Normal, and see the frustration.
I don't see how parking would be. I just don't see how parking would be the number one reason why anyone would want to
Okay,
develop.
so for our shop, our average age is probably 50. So, especially in weather like this, they're not going to walk a block.
But by comparison, because I did a study on parking, years ago, and the individual has to walk farther from their car, Walmart parking lot,
True.
than they do anywhere downtown
True.
most of the time. It's the mindset of I have to be at the front door. And we can't change that mindset from individuals, but really in downtown, you know, from the Dargan parking lot well, your building, the same as Walmart to the back door.
But if I'm in a shop Walmart, it's everything I need. If
Right.
you come to my shop, you're not
Right.
gonna have everything.
But it's not really that long.
I agree with you, but I've seen too many people say, I can find a place to park at that stop.
But we can't, we really, I mean, finding more space.
Right.
Our parking currently is not compliant with, ADA accessibility. We need to redesign. We've got it on our agenda.
So I'm curious, why we don't have a meter maid that says, all these people that own shops work downtown, why are they parking in front of everybody else's shop?
If we have,
No,
And the logistics, really, I mean, here's the reality is, the parking enforcement doesn't pay for the employees.
understand. I just wish that people that work downtown would understand, go walk a block so your customers don't know.
That's probably the complaint in every city that has a downtown.
I think you're right. Yes.
I think really, parking aside, it just goes cost, of material. Especially, That's the reason why we're talking tonight, is to help you find grants, opportunities to defray those costs.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the best thing I could do for you is to give you some tools that are on paper before you actually have to put up a stud somewhere. But I think there's also been a lot more work done with test fitting. In our industry, don't go look at AI on the internet, but some people are saying that you can get plans and they're going to kind of produce some idea out there and give you some different test fit materials and say, okay, well, if we shove this one here, we do whatever. The issue is always, of course, you need to be able to have somebody translate that into dollars and cents from a constructability standpoint. And that is where I would say going through an exercise like this with, sitting down and talking through all of it be a transformative process. You spend a little bit of time doing something like this and save tens of thousands on the back end. I mean, yes, to your point earlier, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of time investment that goes on the front end of all of this from historic properties. But if you can do it right, man, you can save a lot of money. And because some of these are, you might have more there to work with on an existing building than you would for, say, a new one, you might be able to do it more economically in some cases.
What if you're not looking for residential, but shop? Is that possible to do that?
Shops on second floor trigger a different problem, and that's accessibility. Can you do it? Yes. Is it a great way of advertising? Generally doesn't work. And it's usually because the people who are wanting to go to a shop are expecting it on the first floor. They just don't have any expectation of having to go into a building and three different things, unless you're in Chicago or St. Louis somewhere or wherever. Yeah. Yeah.
well, the city, one thing we have, I believe there's a handout at the door of proposed if incentives that we are exploring offering for upstairs renovations. We haven't come to any conclusions yet, but we will. So we kind of want your feedback, what those ideas look like. They are things that would be trigger you the want of being able to do things upstairs with our assistance with grants.
Yeah, please.
So right now we have up to a $50,000 facade grant. Right. And right now our facade grant does not cover roofs, does not cover interior renovation, it's facade. It's only for correct. Front, anything visible from a public way.
But we're exploring interior development.
When we think five,
It is not included.
Yeah.
Windows, doors, brick, sides of the building.
One thing that we started to do as a city council move about 5 years ago, they wanted us to look into creating greater accessibility through this facade grant. And so if there was an entrance, if there was something that was tied within a few feet of the front of the building, that was a great way of tying it into the facade grant. So it was like, okay, if I can bring that back door, that front door, whatever, and then the associated architectural changes interior to that, then it would comply.
Yeah, and we have also entrance, we're working on.
I'm curious, the Rust grant in Wilmington Normal, that's outside of the DIP. Is city coffer funds that they have designated?
Correct.
for this?
It just so happens that they also overlay for most of it.
you mentioned the enterprise. Our enterprise zone is
Right,
the interstate.
not downtown.
So we, every time we try to do something, it wasn't, even when we did Wallace, they said, I would.
The CDP, or the, I was looking at the CEO grant that we got today. Like, the thing of what's available, so I was reading through those, and I mean, a lot of them, it's like, once they're active, they're triggered to a specific location. So how do we?
Strong arming representatives. Strong arming representatives is just about the only way to do some of those things. I think there's been a lot of conversation, in Bloomington about something similar, and that there hasn't been some of that investment. One of the comparisons here for historic tax credits is there's a River's Edge credit, and it goes in as far as Peoria, but doesn't go to Bloomington. And we go, well, we would like some money too. And so that's been an argument we're trying to make right now, is just saying, well, can we, might as well just, we're developing. We've got Rivian, we got State Farm, and but I'm not on a river. That's right. Does the Mackinac count?
I've talked to a lot of people that come here to visit that they're retiring young, maybe 58 or 60 years old. They come, I'd love to come back here and live downtown.
Yeah.
You got everything else. And that's why when you're a big draw. People like our city. And,
Can I
pull something like that off and just afford it? That's it. I mean, what are the apartments that you've redone in Livingston ready?
Boy, the most recent ones are 12 to 1500. 12 to 15, somewhere in there at the very lowest end.
Yeah.
A lot of them that have been redone in the last couple of years are like 1750 to 2000.
Yeah. And we're getting some of those.
Yeah. So let me throw one other thought at you. By rights, because of the codes and the way that all these things are resolved, you don't have to put in an elevator. You can.
Well, it's just
Once you reach it. Well, but let me throw this out at you. Vertical platform lifts, the cheap version of an elevator, can still work in those scenarios. And especially if you have a unit that is tied to multiple levels, those can be a very successful way of implementing that. And that's on the order of 30 grand instead of 200. Yeah, same, yeah. Yep.
You want to get two people in there and
Yeah, it's tight. Yeah, for sure.
So one of the things that we annually do are facade grants, and we budget $150,000 for facade grants for downtown. In the last couple of years, we have not had the applications come in that have utilized all of that. So therefore, we've gotten to where next year I would expect that the council will budget facade grant money as well as interior building money, and specifically for this program, but also that grant program is there for building owners downtown to use it. If it's not being used, then we need to adapt, make sure that funding is being used.
What's the status for it? You got 13 years left?
About 10 years left. So they moved up.
I couldn't use it because they took me out of tip.
59. Right.
Because you were the mayor.
So I have a little off, but I was wondering, what are grants that are available for new construction? Newer grants.
Yeah.
We're building, newer, fully new building, and how the
Yeah, so if the building is located within a TIF district, then the eligible costs can be different things from making sure the correct infrastructure is available to the building, as well as site preparation. But TIF money by statute can't be used for anything vertical, so it can't pay for any materials for you to actually build the building. But it can help with like planning, architectural expenses, site development, prepping the grounds for it, and then on top of it, and just so everybody's clear, like, because I get asked regularly, and then so in that kind of a situation, what about tax abatements? And so if you think about TIF and tax abatement, they're contrary to each other, because TIF is built off of increment tax, and if you abate it, you take it away your TIF increment. So it's usually going to be one or the other.
So it's anything that's not good.
Correct.
It
It can be used for that.
Now, I'm talking to my partner. He's currently in the process of getting some work, renovation work. Supposed to be. Is there any way I can help in speed up the process for getting the codes and proper laws that are met in order for to start?
So the city runs off of the 2024 building codes. That would be the existing building code and the international building code. But if this is a new construction, is that what?
Yes, it could be brand new.
Right, so maybe based off of the international building codes, and then they can always have a contact with our building and zoning director as far as any questions about what the plan is, you know, and there's so many pieces involved in that. We have to start looking at the drainage and the infrastructure and all those things. But, to help kind of move that along would be, we regularly will meet with the architects and go through and make sure what they're talking about, that prior to any application that our engineers looked at it, wastewater's looked at it, building and zoning has looked at the preliminary plans, and then just kind of have a general conversation about zoning as well. And yeah, just kind of give some ideas on what the city is looking at and what the requirements are.
You said the building.
Yeah, and that's all here too.
That's private, you don't much about that.
There we go.
Anything else out there? Well, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul, for coming, and thank you to all of you for being here. I hope you got beneficial information. You know, if you're thinking about anything, be sure to be in touch with Jim to lead the call and ask questions and get more information. We really do. We want to see some movement.
Especially if you want to own and renovate a movie theater.
Yes.
That would be
What? What? Yeah. Yes. Done that. One other thing that I'd mentioned too is that we did work with the city, that there's a discount for my services associated with some of these things, right? So if you'd like, feel free to take advantage of it, and I'd be happy to.
Just that tool he showed right there will pay for itself.
Okay.
Thank you. And there's still food if anybody